Well, I'm excited to be here with you, and we're going to start off with a little video. It's about a 2.5-minute video called Accelerate, kind of the concept of slowing down to speed up. So we'll go ahead and we'll watch this video first, and then we'll take a few minutes and chat. So from a standpoint of what we're going to spend today talking about, I want you to maybe just slow down to speed up. All right, let's maybe step back a little bit. We're going to talk about some things that may, to some degree, feel a little bit of touchy-feely. But I tell you right now that it's life-changing, that relationships changed my life. They've changed our organization, and really they are what make the world move around. And so a couple of things I want to just maybe start off with is first off, this is an interesting perspective for me to be here. I remember only probably one lecture from my whole time at BYU, and it happened to be in this room. It was with Norm Nemro. Some of you may have a class with Norm Nemro or have had a class. If you've had a class from Norm, raise your hand, or in one right now. I have the privilege of actually now working with Norm on a church level. We're in the same stake, and he's a missionary, he and his wife. And the one lecture that I remember of Norm Nemro is the lecture when he described why he taught at BYU for $1 a year or whatever, his path to being able to retire and do what he loved. And the reason that lecture stands out in my mind is because for the very first time, and I know that a lot of professors put their whole heart and soul into it, but for the first time, I felt like he was telling me something that resonated and aligned with what I wanted to do. And so for those of you who haven't heard his lecture, I'll sum it up in maybe 15, 20 seconds. In essence, he just basically talked about how he had gotten a lot of success and was able to retire at age 35. And if he didn't screw it up, he should be fine for the rest of his life. And so he could go do what he wanted to do, and he wanted to teach. And so he began to teach. And he talked a lot about it. He took a whole hour talking about that. And it was inspiring. Well, I went home and I was telling my wife about it, and I did a really poor job describing it to her because she kind of had that loving look that maybe ladies can appreciate, where you're just being kind, listening to your significant other, and that's what that was. But I don't know, 6 months, 8 months later, we're flipping through the TV, and on, I think it was on a Sunday, BYU TV or something, there was this special on Provident Living that had Brother and Sister Nemro on there talking about their life and Provident Living. I said, honey, you got to come see this. This is the professor I was telling you about that had a life-changing discussion. And he proceeds to, the episode was talking about how he had made a grundle of money and had gotten into a position, and he talked about how at age 35, he had decided to retire, and he was going to do what he wanted to do, which was become a professional golfer. So every day, which was a different story than what I heard from the lecture, right? So every day for 9 months, he would leave and he would go golf for the whole day, and he would come back home, and after 9 months of not getting that much better, and his wife saying, hey, you're not working, and yet every day I'm still working. We need to fix this arrangement. That's when he went into teaching. The thing that jumped out to me through that whole experience of watching Norm Nemro talk about what he did is he talked about how big of a home he had. They had built this beautiful, gigantic home in Southern California. And they decided to move to Utah. And he goes, I was super excited because you could get 3 times the size of house for half the price. So they had this monster of a house. And then you have Sister Nemro talking. She said about 6 months into having this home, I said, Norm, I can't handle this anymore. And she says, I think we're losing our family because everyone lived in their own wing of the house. And so Norm goes, hey, you pick it, we'll buy it. And so she went out and she found a house, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with like the Edgemont, Provo area where Days Market is. So kind of in that general vicinity, that's the Edgemont area. She found a house that was built in 1960. Went up to the door, knocked on the door, 2,700 square foot home. Knocked on the door and said, sir, I'd like to take a look at your house. And he goes, for what? And he, well, we might be interested in buying your home. And he goes, it's not for sale. And she goes, we could make it worth your time. And they went through the house, and she brought Norm through, and Norm goes, you got to be kidding me. It's a joke, right? And he goes, no, I think I love it. And so they bought the house. And she goes on to talk about how that decision actually changed their family and made a lot of different positive effects on their family because it brought their family back together. She said that home had an epicenter. That epicenter was the kitchen where everyone could hang out and they could be a family again. And in our world, they could go back to building meaningful relationships. And so I'm going to talk to you today about building meaningful relationships, but doing it in the business fashion and why it matters. And before I jump too much into that, I'm reminded of a medical school experience where there were a room full of med students, that there was an attorney that came in to talk about how to not get sued as a doctor. And he said to the students, he says, pull out a pen and paper. I'm going to tell you exactly how to not get sued. And they all got out and they were really attentive. And they said, become friends with your patients. Have good bedside manners and build a relationship. Because people rarely sue people they care about. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about how to become successful in business, how to become a successful entrepreneur. But to do that, you have to slow down to speed up. And so I'm going to tell you some things that you may roll your eyes about, and you may think, this is a little too touchy-feely for me. But here I stand at age, be 38 in a month, and I remember being inspired by Norm Nemro, thinking if the time ever came that I could come and teach for free, I will have reached the pinnacle of what I dream about. And I'm going to tell you how it happened. It all happened through relationships. So if you're taking notes, I'm going to give you a couple of words that I want you to write down. If you want to even divide your paper up into two, I'm going to give you 5 words that start with the letter P. And on the other half of the page, you may come up with other letters or other words that start with the letter P. But the 5 words that I'm going to talk to you about are number 1, passion/purpose. Passion or purpose. Number 2, people. Number 3, persistence, or you can put a /pivot. Number 4, profits, or a /propellant. And the last one is perspective. So passion, people, persistence, profits, and perspective. Now the first one, as we kind of talk about this one, I'll share you some experiences, and I'll try to wrap up in a time that maybe you can ask a few questions if you'd like to. When we started Corporate Alliance, it was between my junior and senior year. I was studying Russian and international law and diplomacy. And I was studying international law and diplomacy because I didn't get into the business school, and I had a scholarship that expired in 4 years, and that was the fastest way to get a degree. So as I went through that, between the start of my senior year, my brother-in-law started a business called Corporate Alliance, and he said, hey Jeff, do you want to go to work for me for $8 an hour? And I said, sure, I need a job. About 2 months into the job, I really loved what we were doing. And I remember riding in the car with him, and I said, hey, would you let me work for equity? And he said, sure. So we redid the calculation, and for the next 2 years, I had the privilege of working for equity. Do any of you know what it means to work for equity? Work for free. That's exactly what it was. It was work for free for the next 2 years, with the idea that then I would have an equity stake in the business. But the business was worthless after 2 years, in all honesty, so it was work for free. It was an incredible blessing because I discovered that I enjoyed what I was doing, not because I was getting paid for it, but because I enjoyed what I was doing. Up to that point in my life, the only other thing that I enjoyed doing and not getting paid for was playing basketball or dating my wife. Those were the only 2 things. And here I found something that I felt was equally as fulfilling as those things. And someone had described to me that there are 3 different things you can have. You can have a job, you can have a career, or you can have a calling. And I felt like I had found my calling. So when we describe Oprah Winfrey, does she have a job, a career, or a calling? Calling, right? When you work on an inside sales type arrangement for Teleperformance or somebody and you're on the phones, is that a job, a career, or a calling? For most people, it's a job. Some people make a career out of it, and heaven knows, there may be someone who believes it's their calling, right? The main difference between a job, career, and a calling is how it fires you up. So for me, this fired me up. I was working for free or for equity. That is the most important thing. If in your world you can find what you would do for free, that is passion or purpose. In 2004, so we started the business in 2000, it was worthless. In fact, being a partner up to 2004 meant one thing. It meant you'd be willing to pull out your American Express and help pay for payroll on your American Express. Insanity, absolute insanity to think back to that. My dad felt like he needed to have an intervention with his only son. So he pulled me aside and he said, "Son, here you are, 4 years into this business, and I'm wondering, what the heck are you doing? Your wife had a business, you sold it, you had a nest egg, you put all that money into the business. What's going on?" And I said, "Dad, I don't know." I said, "The only thing is that I just feel like it's right. I feel like it's right." And he goes, "Okay." And so I'm going to jump to the next topic, which is persistence. You've got to have the adequate persistence or the reasoning to know when it's time to quit. In hindsight, in 2004, we probably should have quit. We probably should have quit in 2002. We probably should have quit 8 to 10 months into it. But because of the level of persistence that we had to what we felt like was a calling, we were continuing. So I list out here in persistence also pivot. There are times in your business when you hit a point when you need to push through the trial, and there are times when you hit a point where you have to pivot. And this is nothing new to you. But for me, that was real, because it was more money getting put on the American Express, more liability that was being exposed in my life. How many of you have seen the last Rocky movie that they made? Is there anyone in here who has never seen a Rocky movie? It's getting to be that point. I'm really feeling like an old man. Okay, so I'm going to show you just a little clip, about a 1.5-minute clip, of a Rocky Balboa inspirational speech. This is a speech he's given to his son, who has gone into business, and he's getting pushed around. And this is about a 1.5 minutes of Rocky firing him up. Rocky Balboa. I love Rocky Balboa. One of the key elements, it's not about how hard you can get hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep on going. And life will continue to hit you. And all of you are here in the entrepreneurial world thinking, bring it on, right? Let's go for it. How many of you have started a business up to this point already? Is it easy? If it is easy, celebrate it, because it's not going to be easy forever. There will be a time when it becomes hard. It becomes very, very hard. But anything that's worth fighting for, you'll push through. I skipped over the people aspect. People is what makes your business successful. I got very, very fortunate that I was an accidental entrepreneur. I came to BYU having absolutely having no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and lucked into an opportunity where I started to work in a profession where I felt like I'd found a calling. As an accidental entrepreneur, get the water. I got really fortunate to meet some incredible people along the way. Had I been as fortunate and as blessed as you to be in an entrepreneurial class, at this point, surrounded by other people who, at varying levels of desire, want to do something entrepreneurial. I think life would have been easier, but I got lucky. I lucked into that being my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law was the one who started it. How many of you in this room know more than 5 people in this room? Okay, keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. I want to see how high. Get them up high. Know more than 5 people in this room. Okay? How many of you know more than 10? More than 15? More than 20-ish, 25? What would you throw the number out? These are the only 2 hands I still have up here, kind of. 15 to 20? Let me ask, how have you gotten to know each other through this course? Those who have started at 5 and those who all the way up to 20. Just shout it out. How have you met one another? Or are you roommates? Did you know each other coming in? Other classes? Work? Sports? Middle school? All right. It's wonderful. Any other ways that you've met each other? How many of you come in and sit in the same seat every time next to the same people every time? I don't need you to raise your hand on this one. I just need this maybe be an introspective question. This is a rich opportunity. You're coming into a fertile ground where you have an opportunity to interact with people who are like-minded. I love Brigham Young University. I love it a lot. And I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and firmly believe the values that are taught there. We have an office in Southern California, and I will tell you that there are strengths and weaknesses of graduates of Brigham Young University. I'm going to tell you first the strengths that you have. The strength that you have is that every single one of you, whether you go or not, have some type of award that you're a part of, whether it's a singles ward or a married ward, that you have an opportunity to go and you'll meet people in that ward. And all of them, I suspect, are also Brigham Young University students. If I think back to my college days, the only relationships that I have from Brigham Young University, so I was one of you I'm just saying, don't make the same mistake I did. The only relationships I had from Brigham Young University was my freshman ward, which that was back when you came as a freshman, and then if you left on a mission, you left on a mission. So we lived in the dorms. My freshman ward and my roommates right after my mission. People I served in Russia on a mission with that I would see in classes. Those are the only relationships that I have from Brigham Young University in 4 years, and how many ever tens of thousands of dollars invested, and how many ever thousands of hours put in. That's all I have to show for it. I'm in the business of relationship building. Imagine if I had come to a class like this to build meaningful relationships. So learn from me, okay? So one of the strengths is you have a ward that are going to have activities that give you a chance to build meaningful relationships. The weakness that we find in students from Brigham Young University when they come out into the workforce is, number one, you don't know how to interact with people in a social setting. Because how often do you go to the bar to pick up on a girl or a guy? Right? We don't do it. That's the way most relationships get forged, right? In our Southern California offices, when I ask people, so how'd you meet your wife? Oh, we met at a bar. Really? Yeah, group of friends, and we interact with a group of friends. Someone has to initiate that conversation. And I'm not saying, all right, starting today, every night, you have to go to a bar. But what I am saying is you have to figure out how are you going to develop those skills that will round you out in the workforce to build meaningful relationships. What I am saying is that if you come to these classes and you sit with the same people you already know, you're perpetuating the problem. Because outside of Utah, they love LDS kids because on Monday you don't have a hangover, right? And you'll pass your beer tickets over to the buddy, you know what I mean? There's a lot of perks of being an LDS individual in the workforce. But if you don't figure out how to get out of yourself and talk to people to build meaningful relationships, if you leave Brigham Young University with your freshman ward relationships, your mission companions, and your roommates until you got married, it just is an uphill battle for you. So people. So passion, people, persistence, or pivot. The fourth one, profits or propellant. The greatest thing that happened in my life was in 2008, 2007 was one of the most amazing years in all of North America as far as revenues go. If you look back at businesses, all-time highs in 2007. 2008, the Great Recession hits. And from August of 2008 to August of 2009, we lost 40% of our clients. And that forced us to reevaluate the business in that whole pivot mode. It focused us in a way that we had to look at profits. We had to look at things as propellants. If your business does not have a path to profits, ask more questions. When we started, we had this dream. And when hard times hit, we had to determine what's going to be our way to profitability and made decisions based on that. Profits are number 4 on my list on purpose. Not number 1, number 4. They're in order: passion, people, persistence, profits. You have to have them to keep the business going. You'll have many lectures with great fiscal soundness that I'll let them share that. I'm going to leave it at that. The fifth one, perspective. Perspective, to me, was brought home quite vividly last night in Super Bowl. I don't know how many of you saw the Super Bowl. I wasn't a Seattle Seahawks fan, per se, coming into the game. That's probably who I had kind of given my nod that I was excited if they won, but I didn't really care. Until they didn't, right? And then I was like, oh! How many New England Patriot fans in here? Good for you, man. That was an awesome win. The beautiful thing about that is if you remember the end of that ball game very clearly, 49 seconds, I think, is about what it was. The announcers are saying, Belichick is probably thinking it's in their best interest to just let them score so they can preserve as much time as possible. And yet, he didn't call timeout. His perspective was, we've prepared as an organization to win this game. And that defensive back, Butler, I don't know if you heard his post-game comments. Do you remember what he said, any of you? He said, I had a vision that something great would happen to me in this game. And then he said something so amazingly profound. Anyone else remember it? We prepared in the film room, and I knew if they set up for the pick play exactly where the ball was going to be, and I went for it. The power of preparation in that instance gives you proper perspective. The other beautiful thing about it is how humble he was in the end. The guy could hardly give post-game comments because he was so emotionally worked up over the experience. Yet, he put the hours in preparation to be able to deliver when the game was on the line. I think if you were like me, you're sitting there thinking, yeah, they're going to let them score so you can give Tom Brady 30 seconds to kind of go through. And I guess everybody but Pete Carroll thought that. So he throws the ball. In my world, perspective comes in a lot of different forms. Perspective comes when, well, I'm going to show you a video that maybe puts some perspective in place. And then we'll wrap up and go to some question and answer. So let's go to the Jared Stevens first wrestling match. before you kick it up, have any of you seen Jared Stevens' first wrestling match? Any of you know Jared Stevens by chance? Raise your hand if you've seen Jared Stevens' first wrestling match. Jared, you have? Okay. So I'm the father of 5 boys. My oldest is 12. My youngest is 4. I saw this video on Facebook. Somebody posted on Facebook, and as a father, I'm always looking for opportunities to teach my boys how to be men. And I saw this video filmed by Phil Stevens, Jared's dad, and Jared's 7th grade. Many of you remember 7th grade, how painful it was. Put on a wrestling singlet. It's even more painful, right? So this is Jared Stevens' first wrestling match. I'll tell you a little bit about Jared's background while they're pulling it up, and if they can pull it up, great. We'll watch it. If they can, I'll fill you in on how it turns out. So Jared Stevens has cerebral palsy. Any of you have a family member or a close friend with cerebral palsy? The hardest thing about someone with cerebral palsy is they oftentimes get treated as if they're stupid, but yet it's all together up here. Their body just can't function, right? So Jared Stevens has cerebral palsy. His father is an amazing man, and he said, "Dad, I want to wrestle." So his dad goes out to the wrestling coach and says, "Hey, you know Jared, he wants to wrestle. Can we get him a uniform and let him roll around on the mat?" Yeah, they do. They put him on the team, and Jared finally goes, "So when can I have a match?" Here it is, and this is Jared's first wrestling match. So many heroes in that video, right? So a little bit of background. So that's his first wrestling match. He's on the team, goes, "Coach, when can I have a match?" And so they pick the next meet, and Jared's coach goes to the opposing coach and says, "You see, I got a boy over here who wants a wrestling match. Is there anybody on your team who has the proper perspective to handle the situation?" He goes, "I know just the boy." He goes to his captain and he goes, "That's who you're going to wrestle." And that was how much coaching that young man had to go into that match where he gave Jared Stevens the match of his life, right? That young man was in 7th grade. That young man in 7th grade has had a profound effect on my life. He's had a profound effect on my opportunity to teach my sons. I use that video in a lot of speeches. So Jared Stevens and that other kid, who I have no idea what his name is, has had effect on a lot of individuals. The wonderful thing about relationships is you have the opportunity to maintain perspective in every interaction you have an amazing impact on somebody's life. They may not remember who you are, but you can have a lifetime of a change in their world. Norm Nimro had no idea probably who I was, right? Fortunately, now I have the opportunity to know Norm, and I've gone up to him and related the experience and thanked him in a meaningful way. But the effect that Norm Nimro had on my life, he had no idea that he had. So how many people are you touching on a daily basis to build meaningful relationships? There's the knowing and the unknowing. That's where the perspective comes in. So in conclusion, the thing that I would say is if you remember your 5 P's in building relationship: passion or purpose, people. Make sure you focus on the people when you're connecting with them. Persistence or pivot. When the business gets tough, make the decision. Is this something we need to push through, or is this something we need to pivot around? Profits or propellant. You have to have them. Make sure you're focused on them. And then number 5, proper perspective. Proper perspective is what life is all about. It makes it worth it. Thank you for being willing to listen to a guy talk about what's passionate to me. If you have any questions, I think we have, no time. We'll wrap up. We'll call it class, and we'll go to the other one. Thank you very much.